New York State eventually got control of the former M&M, now called the Adirondack. You can see here, in 1972, the Penn Central Transportation Company, successor to the New York Central, discontinued operations between Remsen and Lake Placid. This is actually complicated. I will explain the route next after I'm through with this. But in any case, the Adirondack was officially from Remsen to Montreal and then Remsen to Lake Placid later, because the New York Central stopped using the original line from Herkimer to Remsen after they took the line over, because the Utica to Remsen line, which was formerly the Rome Watertown and Ogdensburg, had a lot more customers, basically, especially via Utica. Although they continued using the Herkimer Newport in Poland until the Conrail takeover in 1976. Maybe what I didn't make clear earlier was that William Seward Webb bought the Herkimer Newport in Poland as the first step in building the M&M. It always had its own traffic and its own customers and was originally narrow gauge, actually. They're saying Conrail still owned, or rather began to own, the Remsen to Utica portion in 1976, but they used trackage rights when this private company, or separate company, we should say, the Adirondack Railway Corporation, attempted to restore service between Remsen and Lake Placid, or de facto Utica and Lake Placid, for the Winter Olympic Games in 1980. They did manage to run trains during the games, but they had a lot of safety and management issues, and only for practical purposes ran trains from 1979 to 1981. Not 76 to 81. They existed as a company from 76 to 81. And for about 12 years, there weren't any services on this line of any kind. It was abandoned. It was owned by the state. And I'll show you a map later. And basically, by 1990, there were a group of people trying to restore the line again. That was when I got involved. I became involved via the National Railway Historical Society. Another organization attempting to restore it was the Adirondack Railway Preservation Society, who took over the project in 1994 completely from the NRHS. The project initially was called the Adirondack Centennial Railroad when the NRHS was running it, and later the Adirondack Scenic Railroad when the Adirondack Railway Preservation Society was running it. And initially, we only operated trains between Thendara and Minnehaha because it was 4.5 miles. We could run it at 10 miles an hour. We had an all-volunteer crew pretty much, except for the general manager and one or two others. And we were much more successful than we expected to be. Our initial estimates were about 12,000 passengers for the first year, thanks to a study we had commissioned. But we ended up hauling 62,526 passengers in the first year. The next year we carried 76,803. So we felt that it was a sufficient demonstration of the line's viability. And subsequently, after the Adirondack Railway Preservation Society took over, service was restored between Utica and Thendara, as well as excursion service being introduced between Saranac Lake and Lake Placid a few years later. This would have been in the late 90s. So 1998 for Utica, and a year or two later for Lake Placid. The Lake Placid operation was never as successful, and I never actually worked on it myself. There was a separate group of volunteers. But today, the two projects are sort of stuck where they left off in the late 90s. And they also have run into legal problems with snowmobilers wanting to tear up the line and turn it into a snowmobile trail to add to the hundreds of others already in the Adirondacks, instead of preserving the one railway line through the Adirondacks. This illustrates the absurdity of transport policy in the U.S. But it is, for the moment, still in existence. I did a trip just as a tourist on the excursions, or one of the excursions, between Thendara and Otter Lake in the summer of 2018. And I have a video of that I'd like to show everybody. First of all, I should assert what I've always asserted, which is that you should read real books about this subject. There's much more to be learned from books than from the internet on this. This is one of those blind spots in the internet that really you can't learn very much about from the internet, other than the basics. And even some of the basics are missing, actually. Some of the best books are Henry Harder's Fairy Tale Railroad from 1979, Michael Kudish's Where Did the Tracks Go from 1985, as well as his updated multi-volume set on this. This original book is, I don't think, still in print, but the multi-volume set is. So if we zoom ahead in the book catalog of this particular book site, I'm not endorsing any particular book site, you can find his books on botany, of course, but there's one of the multi-volume set that you can order. He also did a more in-depth history book called Railroads in the Adirondacks, A History in 1996. I'm still trying to get my hands on one of these. They're very expensive, though. You can see even the used ones are $65. It's a very desirable book, though. Excellent. I have skimmed it. I know that what's in it is very, very good work. So if you want to really learn about railroads in the Adirondacks, whether the Mohawk and Malone or the various defunct railroads, he's your guy, I think, probably more than any other author. My friend John Caruso, who I volunteered with on the Adirondack, also wrote a book in 2003 called Thendara Railroad, and I also wrote a book in 1997. So I'm going to jump over to Google Earth now, and we'll take a look at the line itself physically. So there's New York State, and there's the Adirondack Mountain Range. Notice how few roads there are. They only have the interstates marked here. You see there are no interstates through the Adirondacks except for arguably Interstate 87 here, also called the Northway. There are some state routes. And on Google Earth, if you're familiar with Google Earth, railways are marked in black. So there's the Adirondack Scenic, both operational and non-operational portions of it. There's also, if you go way over to the east here, there's also the old North Creek line, which was originally called the Adirondack Railway, strangely enough. It's a little bit older than the Adirondack Scenic, but it's only over here, you see. It could have been a great tourist line back in the day, perhaps, but the only real claim to fame it has is that it was at North Creek train station that Theodore Roosevelt learned that he had become president, because they went up to Mount Marcy, which was and is the tallest mountain in New York State, where Vice President Roosevelt was hiking, and brought him back down and told him that President McKinley had died, so he had to become president. There's the station. There are tourist trains operated there by the Saratoga and North Creek Railway. You can see it's marked there. They used to be called the Upper Hudson River. Anyway, if we go back to my project, which was the Adirondack Scenic Railroad, it is a little bit difficult finding what's left of the Herkimer Newport in Poland, because it hasn't operated since 1976, and there isn't much track to speak of left of it. If we go over to Herkimer, New York here, the grade is not really marked anywhere. You have to go up north, and the staff over at Google have marked out some of the later parts to be abandoned. Basically, they start at West Canada Valley Central School here, just randomly. You can kind of see the roadbed continuing on this way, but it's very, very hard to see. But if you go this way, you can see it more easily. You see? You can see where the trees have grown up next to the railway line. This is something that you see a lot along old railway lines, where it's the border between the track and the land around it, roughly forming the border between the railroad right-of-way and private property, or non-railroad property. This factory here would have been one of the old customers. In any case, if you continue north, you eventually end up in Remsen, and I'll continue this in the next video.